Hey there, folks, and welcome back into the Northern Football Podcast, episode 223 of Northern Football. Ben Steiner alongside Alex Gongabruzik. Brendan not able to join us this week as he resettles back into Toronto from LA, but a bit of a quieter week in Canadian soccer, it seemed. Not so much for the players, women's national team players consistently getting injured, but also coming into camp ahead of some friendlies against Argentina, which I imagine you'll be at over the next few days in Langford and Vancouver. But the men's national team players go right from the CONCACAF Nations League into stellar form with their club teams. Quite the weekend of Canadian soccer. And Alex, I know it was quite the weekend for you as well. You conquered your first half marathon.
Well, not officially, but yes, I went out and as people like yourself do, who, at times I may have questioned the sanctity of what was going on. I can see it now. You just head down, put some music in, run, and next you know you've hit 21.1 kilometers, and for a few hours you feel pretty darn good about yourself, and then a few hours you're fighting for your life with ice packs and hot baths to get the recovery all in. But no, all in all, I'm happy with the first attempt at it, because of course I'm running an official race in about 5 weeks time, so I want to just get her done and see what the hype's about. And I can't wait to try and get that marathon that you got last year.
Yeah, well, this weekend you completely wiped the floor with me in MLS fantasy. I think you beat me by like 30 points, but I also ran 21K this weekend and did beat you in that. So 1-1 in terms of our wins this weekend. But of course, you've got your race coming up. But getting into that big week for the Canadian men's national team players, the biggest story of the week, no doubt, the Alphonso Davies situation. Bayern Munich frustrated with Canada Soccer. Canada Soccer saying, they treated Alphonso Davies as they would any player and brought him the utmost care, made sure that he was fit enough to play the game. Jesse Marsch not saying anything on the situation. Davies' agent saying Marsch pressured him to play into the game. It's been a bit of a mess. I know you've written about it in various places. I wrote about it on SI. This is not a great situation. And the part that kind of stands out to me is that this is very much the respect that Jesse Marsch was talking about when it comes to Canada in the global soccer space, because I don't imagine that if Alphonso Davies was, say, Argentinian and the World Cup was going to be in Argentina, and this was Argentina's last competitive match with him available before the World Cup, that we'd be talking about Bayern Munich potentially suing Canada Soccer or taking legal action against the federation. That's not something that would happen if he wasn't Canadian, I don't think. And it's unfortunate how it's come out. Davies posted on Instagram a photo of his leg completely, wrapped up in a major sort of exoskeleton cast type thing. Not good for anybody in the situation, but it's gotten real ugly over the last week.
Yeah, or otherwise known as a knee brace. But
it looked like more than a knee brace, to be fair.
Yeah, no, they definitely have some special stabilizing bands that you gotta use when you do come off a major surgery like that. But yes and no. I think that's the one thing that's come to. I think it's important to remember in all this. This is Bayern Munich. This is FC Hollywood. This is the biggest club in Germany, acting the way they have for decades. Some important context, like Arjen Robben in the 2010 had a bit of a legal spat between Bayern and Netherlands over him developing a very serious hamstring injury as he played throughout the World Cup. Bayern got really pissed about that. It led to a whole thing. There have been other instances of Bayern having to go at Germany when they've had issues with Manuel Neuer and etc. So I think it is important, worth noting that yes, this is just what Bayern does, but at the same time, you can't help but feel the dripping frustration, that annoying superiority they had about it of, well, this was a match of no sporting significance. This was a third place game and all this sort of stuff. And that for me, of course, rubs me the wrong way, just because, again, this is international football. It means a lot more. All you have to do is look politically, see what a game between Canada and US means right now. Okay, maybe of sporting significance, a third place Nations League. Yes, you wonder why that sort of game is even happening in the first place. But no, that was quite frustrating. And I think the other reality in this is that it just put the player in the middle of this unfortunate situation. Like Alphonso Davies is dealing with a very serious injury. It's one that he's gutted for. He's going to miss important games for Canada. He's going to miss important games for Bayern, who he just signed a new contract with. for, his agent to have a go. And what, credit to his agent, he walked back the comments. I think it's good that he did. It's maybe he should have talked to Marsh before, but I get it when you're such a big client, not just client, like personal friend gets injured, frustration happens. But no, it just really felt unfortunate for Davies in the middle of all this, when the reality is he suffered an injury that could have happened anywhere. He got kicked. Timing happens. There are a lot of other implications with it. You did a great piece, Ben, on terms of actually talking to a doctor. And the reality is, when you deal with hamstring issues like Davies has, sometimes you can deal with knee injuries. Is that linked? Potentially, but ultimately Davies was a bit unlucky, and instead the first week of his injury has just been chaos.
Yeah, I mean, you look back at the moment it seemingly happened, where Patrick Agyemang came up behind him, kicked him in the calf, and he goes down. His knee twists in a bit of a weird way, and that's probably where the ACL tear happened. But then again, it could have happened in a different scenario if that muscle was potentially a little bit weak, as it kind of took a little bit more of the weight off the hamstring, potentially. Even just subconsciously, your body can make those small adjustments, and I'm sure you've noticed that through your running as well. But for Davies, if this happened with Bayern, he potentially doesn't play that game. His ACL is potentially gentle. He gets on the plane and he tears that with Bayern. Are we dealing with the same situation? Are we saying that he shouldn't have played at all for Canada? He shouldn't have done, nearly 24 hours of travel from LA to Germany back and forth? I don't think we are. And it seemed like this might have been a possibility anyways, especially considering his previous injuries and just the freak nature that we see of ACL injuries in soccer.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it opens the door to the bigger pandemic of, knee injuries and how they're handled, and, just fixture congestion playing a big role, like our players recovering enough. But I think in this case, it got presented through the lens of club versus country. And it's a fascinating debate right now, because on one hand, you can understand the clubs. For them, they pay these players a lot of money. There's a lot of commercial revenue at line, lot at stake. For them, of course they're going to think, what is the point of all these country games? Like, they're getting in the way of the commercial interest. At the same time, that's kind of the beauty of soccer. It's a globalized sport. International competition is so important. The fact that these athletes are willing to, sometimes do so without pay, fly across the world to represent their nations, to dream of just being at a World Cup, let alone holding a World Cup one day. It's special. But, on the other side, when there's all these commercial interests, are there too many international games? Are there too many club games? The reality is yes on both. But it's tough, because then players get caught in the middle of it. And you got a young player like Alphonso Davies who wants to play in everything. He wants to be out there. And that's something where, you also wonder, could maybe, someone have been like, all right, like let's take care of him and make sure he doesn't play in it. But these are athletes. They're going to want to play. And Alphonso Davies or a Rodri that gets an injury, there's guys who are able to play 100, 200 games in a row without injury. It's just such a complex situation. But I think you can feel those tensions between international and club soccer, and it just comes out in a big way at a moment like this.
Yeah, definitely unfortunate for both FC Bayern and Canada Soccer, who will have to go through the June friendlies without Alphonso Davies, and potentially the fall friendlies against Romania and Wales as well. There was the potential that he could have been included in that June international window before rejoining Bayern Munich for the Club World Cup, even though he wouldn't have been at the Gold Cup regardless. But not the only public statements Canada Soccer has had to make this week. They sent out a statement as well on John Herdman, who was back in the news this week because he had his hearing in front of an independent committee, and he was given a letter of admonishment for his behavior within all the drone scenarios and his acting both with Canada Soccer and Toronto FC as a coach with under the Canada Soccer umbrella. They released the details of the investigation a little while ago. It seems like this is almost case closed for John Herdman. Herdman also reaching out to TSN with a comment saying that he's taken on actions himself and has kind of kept a low profile over the last little while. What do you take away from the John Herdman news, which seemed a little bit too Canadian in a sense to me, that he kind of gets away without much punishment in this?
Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting situation that we wait, what was it, 8 months? There was all these implications hanging over his head, Toronto FC's heads, Canada Soccer head. He ends up parting ways with TFC, all for in the end for nothing really to happen. I guess maybe from the perspective of all this, it's kind of something where like he kind of served his crime, so to speak, of like, losing the TFC job, and just the fallout that has ensued was kind of the punishment. But it is interesting that in the end, it's just an admonishment, that, there's going to be no implications for him with his coaching. I think that points to signs that, maybe he pops up back in England or back in New Zealand. Although I do wonder if this keeps the door open for maybe a reunion in Canadian football down the road. I can't imagine it's at the national team level, just because, he's coached the men, he's coached the women, he's kind of done a lot, as much as he can. But I do wonder if there'll be, a chance for club football in the future. That's definitely what it feels like when you see the admonishment. Because otherwise, in terms of the punishment, I guess both surprised but not surprised. But in the end, I think Bev Priestman, the fact it happened when it did, where it did, she was always going to take a heavy fall. And I think maybe in the investigation, the wake of everything that's come, they kind of realized that process already played out.
Yeah, I think when you look at this situation, even though it wasn't necessarily an official punishment, losing the Toronto FC job, which was, a job that he was rumored to get for a little while. There was rumors that he was going to be and had envisioned himself as the Vancouver Whitecaps coach. I don't think that he's necessarily re-entering MLS management. We'll get to CF Montréal later, because who knows what they're doing. But I don't think he necessarily gets back into the top level. If he does, it's going to be a massive swing for any club, and it's still a PR nightmare for the brand of John Herdman, who probably won't be able to reach the kind of heights that he would have when his stock was so high when he was coaching Canada at the national team level, when every outlet in the country was giving, in-depth profiles on him, and he was this national sporting icon and hero, and then TFC bring him in as kind of the perfect guy in that scenario to potentially save their club, and where it was at with Lorenzo Insigne and everything happening there. It didn't work out for John Herdman, but because everything that hasn't worked out, because he had to take a step back from the TFC role, that's almost the punishment in itself. And maybe it would have been a little bit cruel to put additional punishment on him. And a letter of admonishment is a warning. It's a bit of a yellow card. So, don't go out and do something like this again. I'm sure if he enters coaching again, it will be in a very different manner and without any sort of spying. Could the CPL be an option potentially? Afshin Godby in Vancouver has not necessarily been successful in terms of on-field results. He's certainly been successful in developing some young players in Grady McDonald and TJ Tahid so far. But I could potentially see John Herdman, who lives in Vancouver, making his way to Vancouver FC in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think, anything of that regard, could make sense. I think the big thing to notice, since he was admonished, this seems to indicate there wasn't any, there was some ways of, in the wake of the women's team reporting that, there was some bad locker room culture stuff, parties, etc. The fact that Herdman kind of got off in that regard seems to indicate for him the big problem was just the cheating, so to quote unquote, just the spying. And not to saying that, I think, like you mentioned, there was punishment involved in that. But hey, Marcelo Bielsa, one of the best coaches in the world, has had his issues with spying and whatnot. It's not something unknown in the European and global game, as we mentioned a lot when this whole situation was playing out. That's why I think again, it might be something we have to lay low for a bit. Just go on, do some more coaching work. Do the classic, work on yourself kind of thing, and then come back in a few years. But I think that teams will be less wary of that. It's like, okay, like he wasn't cleared of having bad culture. He just made some mistakes. He'll learn from it. I do think that will open some, like, again, not the heights we thought he would, but I still think doors will be open because it was an admonishment and not like a concrete punishment, like you're losing your coaching licenses or you're getting banned for a year. I think that would be a lot of a different scenario.
Yeah, I do think his future probably lies in Canada. This is where he's lived for the last, 2 decades. It's where he's built a bit of a family as well. And he's continued to live in Vancouver from everything that we've heard. So I could see Vancouver FC being an option, but I do think that if he does return to coaching, it will be in the Canadian Premier League, potentially with CF Montreal. We'll get into that briefly as well. But Gold Cup pots were also released this week as the seeding came to a close after some qualifying games, which Jamaica had a little bit of a scare. They did manage to get out of it but they do qualify for the Gold Cup, maybe not in the way that many would have wanted. But Canada in pot one at the Gold Cup this summer. Of course, games will be hosted, at least a couple games in Vancouver there in pot one, alongside Mexico, Panama, and the U.S. Of course, the four nations that made their way into the Nations League final. Pot two being Costa Rica, Jamaica, Honduras, and Haiti. Pot three being Guatemala, Trinidad and Tobago, El Salvador, and Suriname. Pot four being Guadeloupe, Curacao, Dominican Republic, qualifying for the first time, and famous CONCACAF nation, Saudi Arabia, who come into this competition as a guest, which isn't my favorite, but they are a decent international team. And I wouldn't be too frustrated if Canada drew them, especially considering Ahmed El Ghamdi, former Pacific FC player, could potentially be on that Saudi Arabia squad. He was on their most recent squad, but didn't participate in their friendly against Japan. When you look at this draw, what would be your best group for Canada? What would be your most fun group for Canada? What would be the hardest group for Canada?
Yeah, I mean, lots to answer there. I think the big thing, we kind of talked about it for this Gold Cup, I want it to be a test for Canada. And I think especially they've got games in BC Place. I don't think we've quite figured out if it's going to be just the one or if they're going to play their whole group stage there. But look, I think one thing that was learned in the last set of the last Gold Cup where they played games in Toronto, no offense to Guadeloupe, because it ended up being a great game, but that didn't end up being as much of a draw as it could have and I think that's unfortunate because it should have been a draw. It's a Gold Cup. But for many reasons, this tournament struggles to break through into general consciousness. Doesn't help when teams aren't or don't send a team, some of it by choice, some of it because they're physically unable to. But I think it would be cool to get a good draw, because I think the two teams I'm targeting are Jamaica or Suriname. Because Jamaica, they're going to send a good team. The last few Gold Cups, they've sent Premier League players. They've sent as many big guns as they can. And I think ditto with Suriname. They're, again, on the verge of some good dual national commitments. They've been making some good waves within CONCACAF lately. They're no longer the team that was very new and naive in 2021. Heck, you saw the team in the fall. They gave a lot more of a fight to Canada. You imagine if Canada's missing some regulars, that Canada-Suriname would be a heck of a game. So I think an ideal draw is you get one of a Jamaica-Suriname so that you get a marquee draw. Hopefully it's one of the games at BC Place. But then, of course, the rest of the draw is a little lighter, so you can still experiment. You can still rotate. I think worst case scenario is if you get Costa Rica or Jamaica out of pot two, you get Suriname or El Salvador out of pot three, and then pot four, you get Saudi Arabia. I think in terms of a sporting perspective, that would just be a nightmare group of life. I'd probably go Honduras or Haiti. Honduras, tough to read because they've fallen off a lot. Pot three, Guatemala would probably be my vote, although TNT as well, still building up. And then pot four, you're probably wanting Dominican Republic. The new guy, they got some fun commitments. They made the Olympics. But definitely you look at Guadeloupe. You saw what they did to Canada last Gold Cup. Curacao, Saudi Arabia. Some tough teams in pot four. You could argue it's tougher than pot three. So funny how this draw kind of played out.
Yeah, for me, I went through it as well. I think the most fun would be Jamaica, Saudi, and Guadeloupe. Guadeloupe to get an easier team, but one that Canada, has had struggles against in the past. So you get past those demons of Guadeloupe. Saudi Arabia, I think, would be a good test to play a non-CONCACAF team in a CONCACAF competition. Yes, it's not great that they're in this competition to start off with, but I think if you're going to have a decent Asian side within the competition, it'd probably be a decent test for Canada from a sporting perspective. Jamaica as well would be a fun opponent and a challenging one. I would find that fun because each game would come with some pressure. The difference being that would be quite testing. I think the hardest group that they could draw is probably Canada, Costa Rica, Trinidad, and Saudi Arabia or Suriname. Could be interesting to see if that one comes to fruition. The best and easiest draw, probably Canada, Haiti, Guatemala, and the Dominican. And with the Dominican, I do wonder whether we'll see any involvement from Jose Bautista, because he's been involved with soccer. He's one of the owners of the Las Vegas Lights in USL Championship. So that could be interesting to see Bautista against Canada in some way, of course, considering the heights he hit with the Toronto Blue Jays. But I do like my most fun group being the Canada, Jamaica, Saudi, and Guadeloupe.
Yes, well, it's unfortunately not physically possible, but I imagine you swap out Guadeloupe for what? Like you throw in like El Salvador. Like I think Jamaica, El Salvador, Saudi, like you're having some fun there. So no, I definitely think there's good options, and yeah, I'll be curious to see. I think there's a balance. You don't want a too hard group, but you don't want the group Canada had last time in 2023. Because the reality is too easy, and then you can say, well, they didn't do that great in that group and ended up getting a match with the US, but it didn't help them because they didn't play great that Gold Cup and they still scraped through. I'd rather have it if you don't play well, you don't get out your group. More to learn that way, because then in the end they kind of salvaged it against the US. We did learn some things. Jacob Schaffberg had a great game. That was his kind of breakout moment, but it just felt like the group stage didn't test them enough. So I'm kind of hoping for a bigger test, but also some games where you can throw out some of the new guys maybe Marsh hasn't been able to use or hesitate to use.
Among those guys that Canada hasn't maybe necessarily used, we had a lot of questions about the Gold Cup, especially about the roster that we didn't get to in our last episode. How do we think Canada will tackle this in terms of a roster they're going to send, and who do we want to see step up? Of course, it was another big weekend for Promise David, and I think we could see Promise David and potentially even Jonathan David at the Gold Cup. But even if that's not the strike partnership that we see, I think we could see an interesting partnership between Promise David and Tani Oluwaseyi, who has looked tremendous in his return, full of confidence for Minnesota United.
Yeah, well, I wondered the question now, and we had a lot of this, and we didn't get around to it last episode, is does this change the commitment level of guys? I'm not saying that it needs to be questioned, but I think you win the Nations League. I think there's a little questions of like any guy who has doubt, you're given the benefit of it, right? In the sense that like you're Jonathan David, you're dealing with the new club situation, like go get the time off and go have, go deal with that. If you're Alistair Johnson, you've had a grueling season, take the time off. Stefan Eustáquio, you play a lot of minutes, you get the time off. I do wonder now, they still want to win a trophy. Jesse Marsh is going to be looking like, guys, we don't have a whole lot of competitive windows left. In fact, that's kind of the last one, right? Because after that, it's just friendlies. I do wonder if that will sway some guys. I think it depends. Like with Jonathan David, for example, like what club is he joining? When will they need him by? Has he already figured it out? Is it going to be something he's still figuring out in, July, or is he signed a pre-contract we don't know about? And as soon as it's June 1st, boom, we know where Jonathan David's going. Is it in England, etc.? That's the one where I'd be the iffiest on, but I think all of a sudden, like, I'd be pretty confident. Well, Stefan Eustáquio, of course, can't go because of Club World Cup, but Alistair Johnson, I wouldn't be surprised. Moise Bombito, of course, Nice might have some Champions League qualifiers to play, but if they don't, like, I could see Moise Bombito, Derek Cornelius, Marseille as well could have some European games. I think it would be good to see some of those core guys because, while it'll suck not to have Davies, Eustáquio, maybe David, a lot of those guys still have a lot to prove. All those guys are big leaders. Like Moise Bombito right now is, he's starting to put himself in that Davies-David discussion in terms of his importance to the national team. Having him step up in a tournament like this would be huge. So I definitely would keep an eye on those. And then from there, yeah, just fill in cracks. Any roster spots that are less sure of, like, for example, left back. If Luca Petrasso has a good few months, give me some Luca Petrasso. If Raheem Edwards is having a few good months, throw him in just to test the depth. Same with the strikers, right? There's so many of them. We got to get a look at them. And the midfielders, like, this has to be a tournament for Nathan Saliba. I know it was a bit of a tough start for him, and now he's dealing with an injury. But with the new coach in Montreal, can we see some more Nathan Saliba and some other youngsters of that sort of ilk?
Yeah, I think when you look at this roster, it has to be, if you can get the commitment from the top guys, outside of Davies and Eustáquio, of course, you bring in the best group that you can possibly find, but you don't necessarily play them all. Like, there will be the worry of match congestion after a long season for a guy like Jonathan David, and you don't necessarily have to put him out there against Guatemala if that's going to be one of the games that you're playing. He doesn't need the stat padding. Canada doesn't, need a game like that with their best players. So that can be the kind of game where maybe you do start, Theo Bair, if he gets back into the team, if he hits some form, Jason Russell-Rowe, Tani Oluwaseyi, these players that are probably not starting when it comes to the big games. But then when you look at a potential semifinal against what's likely going to be Panama, USA, or Mexico, well, that's a testing environment that you probably want, these top players in. So I think that that's kind of the situation that we'll see, where these top players will be on the roster, but we're not necessarily going to see them playing in the group stage very much, if at all.
I love that idea because I think another thing that potentially contributed to the 2023 team struggles, it was super young, right? They were missing the big eight, we were calling it at the time, because like all of their top eight guys were missing. You kind of felt that, right? Like they had to throw Moise Bomb. Well, they didn't have to, but they threw Moise Bombito into the six. It was guys like Ali Ahmed getting the first caps, and guys like Ahmed impressed that tournament. But there was a lack of maybe leadership of just, you're looking around, you're missing those guys. And I think having them in training, even if they're not playing as much in the group stage, and then knowing in the big games, oh, you can start a David, like that would be huge for any young guys that step up. So I think it would be a good mix of, you leave room to bring some youngsters. Like I definitely think, like, for example, TFC, there's like DeAndre Kerr, the way he's playing. Although I don't know how serious his injury is from the week. Like DeAndre Kerr is available, you give him a look. Ditto with the Whitecaps and some of their youngsters, but it's just so much more valuable to have them at a Gold Cup when you're training with Jonathan Davids and you're training with Alistair Johnstons. And I think in 2023, they kind of suffered from not having those guys versus 2021, where they had a fantastic Gold Cup. Well, it's because they had Eustáquio there. They had some other big guns. Yeah, they were missing David and Davies. And I think it'll be good to get a balance. So I love your suggestion.
Yeah, I think when you look at a potential, starting 11, in a strong game, you could have basically your first choice 11 outside of Alphonso Davies. Like maybe Ali Ahmed plays left back and Jacob Schaffenberg plays left midfield, but then your top two is, one of these 9 strikers that are in form for Canada. That it's probably not going to be an issue when you look at those potentially big games in a semifinal and a final, and hopefully Canada winning the Gold Cup and finally getting that sort of statement win. Because in this hypothetical scenario, say they send a team without the top 6 guys, as I think many people have potentially seen as a possibility for this tournament, and they go on a run and they capture form. Jason Russell-Rose scores a bunch of goals. Taniolo Asei scores a bunch of goals, and they somehow win without their top 6 guys. Is that a statement win still? Like, is that still this group getting over the hump, even if they didn't have some of the key players in that group? I don't think so. And so I think you need the top players, even if they don't play many minutes, to get over that hump, because the Nations League win wouldn't mean as much if it was with the depth players as it would with the best players.
It would mean a lot, actually. I would disagree on that, but I think imagine if you're the top players and you see that, all of a sudden your seat might get a little hotter. So I do wonder if the top guys will be thinking like there's some guys knocking on the door for spots. Like, forget that. Okay, I think Jonathan David, his spot's pretty safe. He doesn't have to worry. Alphonso Davies, he doesn't have to worry. But like I'm thinking of like guys like Tejan Buchanan. He's had to fight because Schaffelberg and Ahmed have been so good. Some guys in the midfield have had to fight. Chouanier stepping up, Nico Seeger, like Alistair Johnson. Like there's competition for his roles. I also do wonder if that's going to play into it too, where like if you're sitting at home watching as Canada wins a Gold Cup without you and you're already kind of fighting for your spot on the team, like competition is also could drive this team to bring a bit of a stronger outfit than we expect.
If you had to make a prediction right now about how this Gold Cup is going to go for Canada, it's still early. We still don't know the groups or anything like that, but where do you see Canada finishing in this Gold Cup?
It's a good question. I feel like semifinals for sure. Feels like, especially after 2023, you look at the draw, they avoid US, Mexico in the quarters. That's always a big plus because, it's tough to play Mexico, US, no matter the circumstances. I think semis is reasonable. I think it would be nice for them to make a final, especially after missing out on the Nations League final. And I think they will have the ability to do so, but hard to gauge until we see the full rosters and the full draw. So I won't go much further than minimum semifinal.
Yeah, I think my gut feeling probably says final, and they lose a final to a US or a Mexico and still can't get over that last hump. Maybe Jamaica is in that final as well and completely tests Canada too. But I don't quite see Canada coming out of this without Alphonso Davies as champions. But of course, not the only national team competing over the next little while. The Canadian women's national team taking on Argentina in Victoria and Vancouver later this week. And it's not too much to note from the squad. Still a very first choice squad from Casey Stoney, but injuries continue to plague this group. Evelyn Vienne has already pulled out. Olivia Smith and Clarissa Laracy also look likely to pull out, with Laracy initially being Evelyn Vienne's replacement on the roster. It seems like there's a bit of tempered excitement for these matches against Argentina, and I'm just glad that they're not playing Brazil again.
Yeah, well, I think they're going to be exciting matches, and I think I'm looking forward to just seeing them in action. But yeah, it is tough with all the injuries to to look at that aspect of it. Like you want to, of course, see the best players. It's at the same time, I think this is just more opportunity for players to step up. I do wonder, again, we don't know yet as of recording. For example, Simi Awujo was left out of the squad due to injury. She plays 20 minutes this weekend. Do we see some Simi Awujo? I would be ecstatic because I feel like Awujo could fit very, very well into this Casey Stoney team. But again, I think the good news is this: you get to see a bit of more from what we saw in February, and what we saw was some very good Mary Yasmin Aladou play. We saw some very good Emma Reagan play. We saw those two really step up. Then up front, we saw some, Janine Sonis. Can we see more of her? Adriana Leon has hit the ground running-ish with San Diego, scored last or a couple weeks ago, but didn't find the score sheet this weekend. I'm excited to just see more of what's going on, because I think there was a good point made to me that while you look at this squad, it really is more of the same. With players like Aladou, Reagan, etc., we're seeing them in a new role under new coaches that they maybe didn't get before. So I think it is still excitement. And hey, plus Jade Rose being back's a bit of a plus too, no?
Yeah, we're seeing them in new roles under a new system, but also this is a very different camp than the Pinatar Cup and Casey Stoney's debut, because now you have Emma Reagan and Quinn in full preseason and ready to go for the start of the NSL season. They're fit, and Quinn, of course, making their way back into the Canadian squad as well. Emma Reagan fully in preseason with AFC Toronto, Quinn with the Vancouver Eyes. That these players are fit, ready to go in Casey Stoney's system. Maybe a little bit of a different look in that respect. And then you also have Mimi Aladou, who finds herself in a completely new surroundings with the Portland Thorns as well. She hasn't been able to get into a game just yet, but definitely a bit of a new lease on life for Mimi Aladou, testing herself in the NWSL after leaving Portugal. An interesting move, but it seemed like Casey Stoney was pretty excited about Mimi Aladou finding her way to Oregon.
Yeah, we'll make that too, because I'm very excited about the move, because I think what I like most about this move for Aladou is just the regular competition. Because I think with Aladou, we know she can elevate her game against top teams. She started to show that for Canada, right? Scores her first goal against Spain. You've seen it at club, like she scores last year against Barcelona, Frankfurt, some other top teams in Champions League. She can play against the top teams. I think the doubt with her is that in the Portuguese league, when you're not playing Sporting on Benfica, there's a lot of games you're winning 8-9-0. You're racking up the scores. How much are you really getting tested? And I think with Aladou, what I love is now NWSL, you're getting tested every week. So that's a plus. Not only that, there seems to be similarity with how Portland and Canada will have her deployed. It looks like Portland might play her on the left, because I love this free role she had for Canada last camp, playing in that left space, getting drift wide, cut inside, play as a number 10. It gives her full freedom to do what she does best, to be creative. So if I'm Stoney, I'm loving this Portland move, and it's interesting to see this Portuguese league pipeline continue to work with players where they can go and like showcase themselves, like Chloe Lacasse, Olivia Smith, and now Aladou have done. But then when the time's right, you make that move to a different league where you can go show those talents on a more regular basis.
The Canadian women's national team also announcing a friendly against the U.S. women's national team July 2nd in Washington, D.C. So you have Canada Day, and then in between Canada Day and Independence Day, you go to D.C. to play the U.S. women's national team. I think this game might have a few political connotations to it.
Yeah, who says sports aren't political, huh? No, I think this is well done. First off, like, well done to organize the friendlies. They managed to squeeze it in. Like, the U.S. is playing a pair of games against Ireland, I want to say, I think it was, just before. So credit to them to find the schedule, maneuvering to get a game like this, because it's a great test. Like, there's just U.S., Canada, U.S. gold medalists, going through a bit of a rejig, I guess you can say. It's not a rebuild, because they hit the ground running under Emma Hayes. But then you look at all the storylines, like Emma Hayes versus Casey Stoney, the two English managers going from a WSL to national team management. You got all these players that are super close. You got a lot of U.S. players, especially on this women's team, who probably aren't too happy with the state of affairs in their own country right now. It's going to be a bit of like we've seen it before, where the U.S. team has stepped up and support Canada, and Canada stepped up and support the U.S. I think this will be a good time for both to just kind of use this as a message. So, man, you look at this on the field, off the field, storylines. this is just going to be, I think, a great game. And honestly, kudos to both for setting up the friendly when they did, how they did, and where they did.
And also our Canadians Abroad segment, Canucks Abroad, presented by Canucks Abroad. You can check them out on canucks-abroad.ca, as well as on their Twitter and Blue Sky and Instagram accounts. Promise, David, what a goal that he scored for Union Saint-Gilloise in a 5-1 demolition of Antwerp. They have continued to roll this season. They're now just 6 points behind Genk in first, and they'll play them twice over the last 9 games. The Belgian league format is exciting, but Promise David, just in exceptional form, and he might need a new shirt. Everybody wants a shirt that they're tearing it off, David, just to stop him.
Yeah, I guess the defender didn't want to pay the 80 euros or whatever it costs to get the yellow blue with David 12 on the back. Can't blame him, right? You may as well get it off the man himself. But I just love what I love about the goal, and it was, I think I saw someone point it out, and it's so true. I just love how David loves scoring so much that he had the occasion to I think he was very well in his rights to just stop, to fall over, and it would have been a red card. But he wants to score so badly that they're literally tearing the shirt off of his back, and he's like, I'm going to go and score. And then, just for those wondering, karma was in play. The guy got a yellow, and then he got sent off later for a second yellow. So clearly he just wanted to get an early shower so bad that he got it through whatever means necessary. But I just love that about Promise Dave. And I think that's what's really stood out watching him full time this first year with USG. He just loves to score goals. He has such a nose for the net, and he's at a great club that's given him the opportunities to develop. And shout out to the Belgian league. For those who don't know, they do a normal league format for the first part of the year where everyone plays each other twice, I think it is. But then they do a championship round where the leagues are split. You got the championship, which is like the top 6 teams. You've got the other teams who are battling for Europa League, and then you have the relegation league. They half your points, and it basically just means game on. Even if you have a 20-point lead in the league, it gets dropped to 10. If you have a 10-point lead, it gets dropped to 5, and you play everyone in the championship round twice. So I just love that, because this means Union Saint-Gilloise, they were a bit behind Genk. Genk is having an incredible season. Well, it's game on in terms of the title race.
Okay, as somebody who loves MLS, a lot of it is my work is in MLS. You're telling me MLS has a confusing system when the Belgian league does this? And I was looking into Liga MX a little bit more as well, and they, have relegation fines instead of relegation over a 3-year period of a coefficient ranking. You're telling me that top 9 is too confusing for MLS? Anyways, we won't go down the whole.
No, it's not
MLS
top 9. It's best of 3s that are what people are grinding their gears about.
Ishmael Kone, exceptional game and an absolute golazo as he, seems to be playing with a bit of confidence coming out of the Canada camp. I haven't seen him hit a ball that well in a long time, and certainly made the rounds on Canadian Soccer Twitter alongside Promise David's goal as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Kone can do. He scored a few of those at Watford in his, I guess, first full season, second season, because he joined halfway through. That's what a confident Ismail Kone does. He's shown it with Montreal as well. And I love that, because we haven't seen a confident Ismail Kone in a while for club, and certainly even for country. It's been in and out ever since that France game last fall, where he had one of those games that he can have. So I think this was good. Rennes have picked up well, as I expected. I mean, they had the mercato that would indicate they were pushing for that, and I think just having Brice Samba, Kone, some of these other signings they made have vaulted them. I'm loving this move right now, and I think if you're Kone, you see the confidence you're playing with, and you're a Rennes, all of a sudden that 15 million euros reported option fee that they have, looking pretty tasty. So yeah, just hopefully he builds off this, because with Kone, we know he has this in him. Now the big thing that's held him back at club level is consistency. Go do it again and again and again. But if he starts to do this pretty regularly, I think Rennes fans would love to have him back next year.
And Tejan Buchanan also had himself a good game for Villarreal and a win against Getafe. Got himself an assist as part of that great performance. Could this be the start of a good run to end the European season for Buchanan?
I would hope so. I mean, Villarreal continue to push for European football. It's good they've given him some starts lately. Real Madrid, now this shows that, okay, maybe the first month we were worried that he wasn't playing as much. Sometimes you just got to get up to speed, get used to the system. The fact that they're integrating a lone player when they have other players in their squad, that there is a Champions League push, this bodes well, because it's like we said when he made this move. You just want to see him play and do well, because either he gets to stick around with what appears to be a Champions League bound club, win, or you go back to Inter and you prove yourself there. So no, I've been very encouraged to see. This looked like the vintage Buchanan. I think he had something like 5 for 7 dribbles. That stands out, because even against the US, he had a good game, but he still looked a bit timid, right? He wasn't looking like himself. A few times he could have dribbled, he slowed it down. Tajon Buchanan is at his best when he's just taking the ball and running at guys, and we saw that Tajon Buchanan again. So I think if you're Jesse Marsh, you're looking like, yes, more of that, please.
And Taniolo is saying a brace as he returns to Minnesota United. I loved the video that he posted after the match on Minnesota United socials, where he said, "Hey, it's Tani here. It's wet, it's cold, but they got 3 points, so everything was okay." But he did look frigid. It was a dismal weather week across MLS. I say, having sat in the stands at BMO Field for a scoreless draw between the Whitecaps and TFC, which was absolutely miserable. But Taniolo is scoring an outstanding goal to open the scoring after a great team goal from Minnesota, and then just a wonderful, finish on a long run through midfield for his second as well. It was kind of the classic Tanny performance.
Yeah, and it's good to see some variety in his goal scoring. We've seen a lot of like one-time finishes from Tanny last year, right? He was the king of the non-penalty XG per 90. He was the king of those kind of 1-2 touch finishes. It's nice to see him score a header. I don't remember him scoring a whole lot of headers last year. Given his size, you want to see him score a few of those sorts of goals. And then the second one, like a long run, good intelligence to cut across the shoulder, to open up your hips, find that near post. 2 good finishes. And yeah, I just love the confidence. You saw it with Canada. He finally got that monkey off his back, so to speak. I think now you're going to see why Jesse Marsh kind of rates him as he does. Like, he works hard, he scores nice goals, he's got a unique frame. So I'm just curious to see where he goes, because this Minnesota team's fun. They can score goals. Oluwase, he's playing a big part in that. Let's hope we see a lot more Tanny time. And sure, feels like at the Gold Cup we could see a lot of Tanny time if he keeps this up.
And Dane Sinclair also getting the clean sheet in that game. Second weekend in a row, the Dane Sinclair and Taniolo come out on top of Diego Luna. He was on the RSL side that lost 2-0 this week. But MLS also just continuing on this week. Laurent Courtois, CF Montreal, sacked before he could even get a home game. What's going on with CF Montreal right now?
That must be one of the harshest sackings we've seen of, you know what, like, there were moments last year where you wondered if he might get the sack. Started slow, just wasn't gelling. He had a fight with Josef Martinez, right? You wondered. He makes the playoffs, they're all good vibes. You're like, okay, they're going to build on 2024. For it to happen when they did, it just feels like, again, like if you had felt these red flags last year, even if it finished strong, people would have understood. All right, you just sack, you get a clean slate, you explain, there were philosophical differences, you move on. To wait 5 games in the season before he gets a home game just doesn't really reflect the greatest on the Montreal side, right? Just because, like, if you're a coach seeing that, like, wow, that feels unfair. And now it just puts him in an awkward position. I think it'll be interesting to see where they move on from this, because, you know what, look, for as much as I liked what Laurent Courtois brought in terms of his ideals when they were playing at their best, it was fun to watch. He hasn't implemented that regularly enough. And yes, there are questions of, does he have a squad good enough to do that? Valid, but you see kind of a bit of glimpses again this weekend. This Montreal team still has good players and they still have a good squad. So I think for Montreal, just the timing of it all is very strange. But I am curious to see where they go for a hire, because do they stick with Marco Donadel? They brought back the former Montreal man as an assistant. Now he's the head coach, interim head coach. Do you go for a familiar face in Mark DeSantos? I saw his name floated around a lot in Montreal circles. Someone who people from Montreal were interested in maybe seeing again. I threw out Vanni Sartini. There's a big Italian community in Toronto or in Montreal. I'm knowing Vanni Sartini. I'd give him 2 months before he speaks fluent French. He's an absolute language nerd. Could work there. What other Francophone candidates could they potentially look at? Very curious to see what their plan is long term, though.
Yeah, I mean, this has just seemed like plenty of issues over a long time for CF Montreal. We saw their supporters groups come out this week saying that they felt disconnected from the club, even though they've brought back, the black and blue stripes and have kind of harkened back to some of the impact days. It doesn't quite feel like the Montreal impact that was so endeared in that community. It also always seemed like this was the plan. Joey Saputo says in an interview that, it was 4 games ago that they made the decision on Laurent Courtois. Well, last I checked, the season's 5 games old when they fired him. They got a draw in their 6th game, 1-1 against the Chicago Fire. But you're telling me that you already had thought about this 1 week into the season? Like, I think they thought about it before that as well, because the minute they brought in Marco Donadel as an assistant coach, who wasn't initially on the CF Montreal staff, it seemed like that was the plan moving forward. And then they get rid of Courtois, and the plan is to keep Donadel for the foreseeable future as an interim manager. Like, it does seem like this is Donadel's job to lose at first. The timing's weird. The decision is odd from CF Montreal, just, in everything, that it seems like they're a bit directionless. I'd love to see Vanni Sartini. I don't know about Marc Dos Santos. I don't know whether Marc Dos Santos would want to be a head coach in MLS again, considering how things went with the Vancouver Whitecaps. Sartini, an interesting name. We talked about Herdman earlier. Could he potentially find his way back into management? I don't necessarily see that. I think that would be a bit of a stretch, but the name's worth floating, considering where he's at in terms of the status being a little bit cleared at this point. Other names that I could potentially see, maybe this is the opportunity for Bobby Smirniotis. Like, that's always going to come up when there's a Canadian coaching vacancy, but I don't think anybody else is going to get the job than Marco Donadel.
Yeah, we'll see how far. Although, again, Bobby Smirniotis, Tommy Will Jr., especially considering Montreal interviewed Smirniotis, 2 coaches ago? They interviewed him after Nancy when they were hiring Losada. Man, too many coaches in Montreal. Like, just pick
Losada.
a guy.
Oh, man, that's
a forgotten year, right? So it's like, hey, because the thing is with Smirniotis, again, from a Montreal perspective, you've got a young project you want to develop, and you felt Courtois wasn't doing that. And Smirniotis just has to show his resume of what he's done, and with Forge and all the guys that have moved on. So that feels like, if they're going to do a full process, those feel like all reasonable names to look at. But like you mentioned, it does feel like the fact that Donadel was brought in, that they were so quick with the trigger, so to speak, to bring him in as an interim, shows that maybe that was kind of the plan all along, right? It's one of those where maybe Courtois was a bit more of a lame duck coach than we realized as soon as Donadel arrived.
Wild potential candidate. Could Peter Vermees make his way to Montreal and finish off the season after leaving?
He needs a good
SBC?
2-year vacation on a beach somewhere, and just to chill, get the blood pressure down after all the referees he's screamed at and the iconic gifs he's produced. Yeah, he's had a great run in Casey. I think a vacation wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for him.
Yeah, new head coach for Zorhan Pasong and Sporting Kansas City. But the CPL
and Stephen Afrifa.
CPL returning this week. Potential news coming out of Quebec. There's going to be a press conference in Quebec City at Université Laval. And there's a whole bunch of possibilities about what that could be. But it seems like there's at least interest from the CPL about putting a team there. Maybe not soon, but at some point.
Yeah, just exciting to have, that connection, because it's been overdue, I guess, as anyone will say, in terms of that Quebec market, and, having a Canadian Premier League team there, be it Montreal, be it Quebec City. It's interesting. It's been Quebec City, of course. Commissioner, Mark Noonan met with some people in Quebec City in March. So it's something that's been brewing for a while now. No, I think you can't help but be excited by the connection. Of course, we'll see what ends up happening in terms of this announcement and how it'll play out. But, no matter what it ends up being, even if it's something like an on-tour game, you saw in Kelowna, the market, the way they came out, got a great attendance. There's interest in that community. It seems to have pushed the idea that there could be a CPL team in Kelowna down the road. I mean, you would hope at the bare minimum, something like that could potentially occur in Quebec. Because, we'll continue to say it. There's just so much great Francophone talent coming out of that province. There's so much interest for sport. You add in just the chaos of the last few years for CF Montreal. Feels like it's a market itching for more professional football. And I think it's exciting the Montreal Roses are going to be there, but there's room for a lot more.
Yeah, I've always said that Quebec City, I think, is the better market for the CPL than Montreal, because there's not necessarily professional sports within the city. There's tremendous support for the Quebec Remparts. There's tremendous support for Université Laval. I've watched soccer at that stadium. It's a solid stadium other than the gridiron, which from what I've heard, even if they get a team, it would stay. at least for the start of their existence. But it'll be interesting to see exactly where that goes with the CPL making an announcement in Quebec City. But CPL also getting set to kick off the 2025 regular season. I know you've been previewing it all over at OneSoccer and CanPL.ca. Who are your top teams in the CPL this year? And if people need a bit of a primer on what to watch in the CPL this season.
Yeah, no, I think it's it's going to be interesting to see who steps up, what kind of goes on. I think if you look from coast to coast, interestingly, two of the teams that had some of the best off seasons are on both coasts. Pacific, wanting to return to past heights, brought home some good, familiar, recognized names who were there when they won the title, Caden Chung, Marco Bustos, but made some interesting signings like otherwise, like the likes of Ronan Crad, Aiden Daniels. They bring in Max Anchor on loan, some new center backs, Ellie Indum's back from injury. Pacific looks like there could be a bit of a rejuvenated squad there for James Merriman, who kind of called it a bit of their first rebuild that they really had under him since he's come in for Pamadou Ka. So fascinating there. Meanwhile, you look at Halifax under Patrice Geisar. They learned a lot in year two. It was expected they were going to come in and compete right away in year two after such a good year one. They came down to earth. Teams, kind of figured out what they had, what they were about. Some of the signings they've made, it kind of indicates, all right, like this Halifax team, they want to compete. They brought in a couple French internationals, or not international, but like French players, internationals. Yeah, they brought in Kylian Mbappe to hold down the wing for Halifax. But no, they brought in Johan Bai, I think it is, and some others. I would maybe find the name off the top of my head is somewhere in the internationals list. Jason Baham Bula, I think it is potentially. They've signed a couple. Intriguing like Alessandro Biello on loan. Love that. Adam Perlman on loan. Two exciting prospects. Ryan Yesley for a Halifax team that needed some new goalkeeper after Jan Fillion left. Like incredible signing. I'm liking Halifax, but then otherwise, of course, Forge Cavalry. Forge brought in so many wild signings as we've broken down throughout the offseason. Cavalry gone for some continuity. Forge gave Monterrey a heck of a time in Champions Cup. Meanwhile, Cavalry beat Pumas in leg one and came close. It shows what's going on over there. And then otherwise, it'll be interesting to see what you see in York. They've brought in a bunch of Toronto-based players like the likes of Stephen Yates, Adonijah Reed. Interesting to see them lean into local, like Julian Altabelli, the former TFC2 striker, had some great numbers. They've got a good little team going on there under Mauro Eustachio. And then Valor has maybe had the quietest, best offseason of them all, bringing in Chris Twardek, Zachary Fernandez, some other really good just CPL experience to help a young squad. They could be recharged. And, that leaves, may as well go through all of them. Athletic Ottawa, new coach, bit of some quieter off season, but I like what's going on there. Vancouver FC had a quieter off season. They're leaning young. That one's maybe a bit more risk reward because, of course, if all the youngsters hit, you could compete. If you don't, it's another year of frustration. But definitely heading into the year, I think Halifax, Pacific, in Cavalry seem like the three teams that would be leading the way in the power rankings.
Of course, you'll be able to catch some of those games on TSN, at least in April, and it does seem like there will be a few of those games on TSN down the road as well. And the question from Hans Young Wong, any insights on the rapprochement between TSN, CSB, CPL, given the previous tension with traditional broadcasters and the lack of coverage for the league? It does seem that since CSB took control of OneSoccer back from MediaPro, that there is a little bit more of cooperation happening within the Canadian soccer space. And TSN does seem interested in not only the Canadian men's national team, we'll see if it's potentially interested in the women's national team as well, but also in the CPL. Of course, we saw the Nations League finals be presented by the Canadian Premier League, and the CPL will have a few showcase games on TSN linear channels as well, and we'll see where that goes down the road. But it does seem like things have calmed down a little, at least between TSN, CSB, and the CPL, with MediaPro out of the picture for the most part. The lawsuit with Rogers and the Competition Bureau of Canada doesn't seem like that's gone necessarily anywhere, or is getting the channel of OneSoccer on one of the regular cable packages. But that might not be the route that OneSoccer is going down anymore, and rather more of a cooperation route with TSN and potentially maybe Sportsnet down the road. And CBC is still in that picture as well. Of course, we've seen their investment in the Northern Super League alongside TSN. But the NSL approaching, that season is coming up fast. The teams are fully in their preseasons as well. And the question from W Soccer CA, only a few weeks away now from NSL kickoff. Who are your players to watch and teams to watch in the inaugural season of the league as we approach kickoff?
Well, love the question because there's so much to go with. I mean, honestly, it's been hard to feel dissuaded by, what we've said a lot of. I think, AFC Toronto, like what an offseason they've had. I just looking at through their roster.
Off season, they've never played a game.
Well, I guess, it's an off season, even though you're not coming off a season. It's still the off season. But what a transfer window what they've had. What a roster build they had. Like I'm just looking at their midfield. They could have a midfield of Victoria Pickett, Emma Regan, and Nikayla Small, and they're still leaving off some of the internationals like Aoi, Kazaki, some of these other intriguing players they've brought in. You look at front, Kaylee Hunter, Maya Jones, Jade Kovacevic. Like I'm really liking AFC Toronto. I think they're going to have a good roster build, and that's going to be good for them, especially, if Toronto FC is struggling a bit, maybe capture some good market attention if this AFC Toronto team gets off to a good start. Otherwise, I think, the Vancouver Rise, just for reasons we've expected, although I will say it feels like that roster build hasn't been as extravagant as I've expected, a little more veteran heavy. Same time, right? Like good squad in the sense like Quinn, Jessica DeFilippo, Nikki Stanton, Josie Longhurst, Samantha Chang. Like there's a lot of good pieces. Shannon Waller. I thought, maybe there'd be one more bigger swing. Perhaps we'll be, there's still a chance to surprise. And of course, Montreal Rose, it feels like they're the opposite. They've made some of the big swings. I'm like, okay, I like the Latifa Abdu. I like, some of these other signings that they've made to, Charlotte Bilbao. We won their first signing, Tanya Boychuk. They kind of lack the depth. They're the opposite of the Rise, or the Rise got depth. I'm kind of looking for a little more of a top end piece. One thing worth watching, and it's true. Like I wonder if the summer window could be one to watch, where since it's a new league, teams are building up. A lot of players in Europe might have contracts they want to honor for the rest of the year. I wonder if some players are there kind of watch it. Okay, let's see the first few months of NSL. My contract's up. Then I'm going to make the jump, because that's what it definitely feels like. It feels like some of the teams, especially like a Calgary or an Ottawa, like they're kind of leaving room in their roster to make a big summer swing. Of course, we don't know who the DPs yet. We don't know the roster composition, but that's definitely the vibe I'm looking at. Whereas like a Toronto, they look ready for day one. Whereas some of the other teams, maybe a Vancouver too, with their pull, you wonder if maybe they pull some of the NWSL players too. Maybe we'll see who's not playing, whose situation. Because you have to feel like the likes of an Alicia Chapman or something like that could be NSL bound at some point.
Yeah, I definitely think that AFC Toronto being kind of the big fish to start off the league, but that could potentially fall back down to earth as well. Vancouver Rise, it does seem, as you say, that they still have some star power to fill, but they have immense depth. The team that's a bit of my sleeper pick is the Calgary Wild, because as many people know, I covered U Sports for a long time. They've got two strikers that were among the best in U Sports. Daniel Steers, the all-time leading goal scorer in Canada West, the Western Canadian 20-team conference in Canadian University Sports. And Christy Gray was outstanding with Queen's University as well, helping them to a couple Ontario finals and an Ontario championship too. They both have a few seasons of professional experience under their belts at this point, and I think they could be a sneaky attacking duo. Even Gray a little bit more dynamic, a little bit faster, and Steer, just a physical unit up top. She was outstanding with the UBC Thunderbirds and has gone on to play professionally in Australia and has also played in Turkey. That I think she could be a real interesting player when it comes to the Calgary Wild and the NSL. The question there, though, is do they have that top level of talent to necessarily elevate themselves among the AFC Torontos and potentially Vancouver Rises? They're not quite there yet, but I do think that Calgary is going to be a fun team to watch, at least in attack with those two players.
They've also built a good spine, I will say, just looking through, like for Kunda Mutaj, right? The Afghanistan national team captain in middle, like very intriguing signing. Of course, Jacqueline Sawicki as well, Filipino international. But then at the back too, like Michaela Moore, we've seen her play for New Zealand, 65 caps. Have that as your center back in a year one of a league, and then you pair alongside her. Like if it's Tilly James, for example, like I watched a lot of Tilly James in League One BC. She's an absolute unit at the back. Also, they've got, Mich K. Rolfsma, center back, one of their internationals as well. Like all of a sudden they got some options too in terms of the back three. And I think that's interesting for Calgary. They've gone for a bit more of a spine, because that always does help in year one when teams are just figuring out names and stuff. If you just have a solid team that won't be conceding goals, you can maybe make up for a lack of offense. So no, I like the Calgary shout, and yeah, we'll see what's going to go on elsewhere. Like, you're looking at Halifax, having Aaron McLeod right away could be a bit of a benefit. Of, she still has some juice in those legs over the last few years. Like, even in her late 30s, she was putting in some good shifts for Orlando Pride before heading to Iceland. You just, again, you look at the rest of the roster. Although, hey, Millie Clegg up front, another New Zealand international. Interesting to see a lot of New Zealanders in the league. Maybe that she ends up being a bit of a formula there where they grind out results and just hope for some Millie Clegg magic up front. And then, yeah, well, of course, we'll see with Ottawa, because they have Desiree Scott in the middle. So they're going to be hard to play against. Like, that's going to be something to keep an eye on. But they've also made some intriguing signings, like a Melissa Dagenet in goal, Stella Downing, former Rovers, TSS Rovers midfield. I've seen a lot of her. She's quick. She's dynamic. That could be fun to watch. And so no, overall, like, a lot of intriguing players, and I think some that we'll get to know a lot more of as we just see them play as well, and see who ends up breaking out in year one.
And a little bit of chatter about League One there as well. Of course, the League One season's making their way, starting soon. We'll get into more of a preview of League One at a later date. And of course, you can follow WSoccerCA on Twitter. And I think she's on Blue Sky as well. AC does a tremendous job of covering everything Canadian women's soccer, especially on the League One side of things. But League One BC started off with tremendous crests. Some of the logos in that league were outstanding. And as the league enters this season, they've given up on some of those logos. We had a tremendous crest in Rivers FC. They're new now, Kamloops United FC. Don't love their crest. Langley United, love you guys. It's a little bit 2003. I mean, if you're not interested in League One BC, go take a look at the crest, because there's some wide variance in there. But it just seems like we reached this peak of soccer crest design in Canada, and we're quickly falling off again.
I mean, depends. I'd say the professional clubs are definitely doing well. We got a whole batch of pretty good ones from the NSL to carry us on. I think with League One too, it's been interesting because a lot of clubs, like especially in League One BC, have been partnering with local existing clubs, and then the kind of like local existing branding is kind of taken over, right? So you kind of get moments like that, or even like a Burnaby FC, who did a rebrand in recent years. It's still kind of LAFC-ish in terms of the colors and that whole scheme. So, yeah, I mean, it's something where I'm always going to be a sucker for more crests and whatnot. But, hey, if the professional teams continue to break down barriers, and, hey, just a shout-out, like, first set of NSL home kits all look great. First set of CPL kits look great. We talked about how this is a good year for MLS kits with the Whitecaps, Montreal, and Toronto. At least the soccer's looking good in Canada. Sometimes it's always a bit chaotic off the field, and we can always talk and argue about all that. But it is nice to at least have good-looking soccer in terms of kits designs, because, hey, sometimes that's part of growing the game, right? Is things like a connection to a shirt. It's as simple as it may sound. People have connections to the Barcelona shirt that go back decades. It'll be nice to build a bit of that in Canada with the first ever Vancouver Rise kit, or, first ever Montreal Roses. What a kit they have, but also in the CPL with some other the kits that have come out, like Valor. Valor keeps continuing to sneakily put together some banging kits. Maybe I'm biased with the one soccer on the front of their shirt, but even elsewhere, Cavalry, like, they got something going on good, where the red and green just continue to lean into that year over year.
Yeah, I am loving the sponsorship in the CPL as well. We got Cafe Artigiano for Vancouver FC, but it's still just a sticker over the CIBC logo at this point. Interesting kit launch as well, spilling coffee on the white shirt. A very clean look for Vancouver FC. I guess maybe not with the coffee on the shirt. But overall, the CPL kits looking tremendous. The NSL kits just stunning as they were unveiled as well. And of course, the MLS kits certainly not eyesores as well as they were a number of years ago, when basically every team had just a plain white t-shirt that, of course, was quite expensive as well. But that's all we've got for episode 223 of the Northern Football Podcast. For Alex Kongiruzik, I've been Ben Steiner. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll be back next time. Make sure to subscribe to our show on whatever podcast platform you get it on, as well as on the 90th Minute YouTube channel, and follow us on socials. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back next time.